Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Please take a moment to click the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon to get weekly reminders of when our new episodes drop.
So each week, Todd and I will be talking about the lectionary reading from the Gospels for the upcoming weekend. And our goal is to talk about that passage in the context of love, compassion, inclusion, societal justice. And our hope is that our conversation will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something might be said during this conversation that might inspire you alongside with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what are we looking at this week?
So we continue in Matthew chapter 22, and we're in verses 15 to 22 with another parabolic teaching of Jesus.
Yeah. So there's a testing here. He's sent. There's a trap that's laid for him here. And the trap is it lawful to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? And Jesus responds by calling them hypocrites and says, "Show me a coin. Show me the coin used for paying the tax. Whose image is this?" He asks, and whose inscription. So he's not just asking for whose pictures on the coin, he's also drawing their attention to what's actually written on the coin as well. What's the inscription? Whose inscription? And I think
Hmm.
there's a lot there. If we understand that in its historical context, there's a lot for us to talk about this week.
And maybe it's helpful to start out by talking about what many Christians traditionally interpret this little teaching here. And yeah, and when I said it was a parabolic teaching, it wasn't that he had set out to teach a parable, but he ended up um, riddling them in a way with his response, which is what he tends to do, is to cleverly answer a question with a question and um, have
I
people
like that
come to
word
their own
riddle.
conclusions. Yeah, riddle me this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so we've
So
got,
what's the traditional interpretation that you've heard, Todd? What'd you grow up with?
yeah, my understanding is because uh, we have an obligation to the state in which we live, the nation state in which we live. Um, we we follow the laws of the land, and in regards to taxes and other financial matters related to supporting the state, that uh, we do that, and that's being faithful to God. And then spiritual matters, personal piety, things, and a little bit of finance as far as supporting the church with some of your finances. Um, those that's the spiritual realm, and so you give to this nation state what is the nation states, and you give to God the spiritual uh, practices of your faith, and that's what God is asking you to do.
Hmm. And I don't know if this is true for you, but most of the time as I grew up hearing that interpretation, these are two separate worlds and rarely do they overlap and impact
Mm-hmm.
each other. We've got the spiritual responsibilities and commitments to God, and then we've got our civil responsibilities to whatever nation state we belong to. And we compartmentalize those. We're just rendering to Caesar the things that Caesar demands, and we're rendering to God
Mm-hmm.
the things that God demands. And what my problem with that is that too often what that creates is a citizenry that looks nothing like that people can't tell any difference between a Jesus follower and a non-Jesus follower. They're just a good American citizen.
Right.
That the only thing that really changes is, they might go to church once a week or something.
Right.
They're just a
Yeah,
good citizen.
that's really the difference between good Americans and good God fearing Americans is one American is loyal to the state and the other American is loyal to the state and goes to church on the weekend. And um, so there's and it's understood, I think, in a lot of ways what it leaves the understanding for most Christian Americans is that uh, there is the sacred and the secular are two distinct worlds, and they don't overlap, and um, and so therefore um, you live your secular life most of the
Mm-hmm.
week, and you live your sacred life at church on Sunday, and maybe at a prayer meeting on Wednesday night, and that's that's how it's broken down.
Kind of a
And
dualistic approach.
yeah, very dualistic.
And
Absolutely.
neither one of those worlds overlaps.
No, no.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how I've heard it. You can. Well, I mean, there's lots of examples we could give. Let's. I think the actual story is a little bit more nuanced than that. I
Mm-hmm.
understand why Empire wants us to interpret it this way. It's very convenient, makes
Mm-hmm.
for good citizens, but there's a little bit more nuance there. So archaeologists tell us that the most common coin that was circulated at the time that Jesus would have most likely been holding up, it had a history. On the front of it, it had a picture of Caesar with the inscription, and on the back, it had a woman seated with a scepter and an olive branch. And that was kind of a symbol of the rule, the authority of Rome, and the peace of Rome, the Pax Romana. But if we're going to understand the inscription, because Jesus asks whose image of this and whose inscription, whose image and whose inscription, if we're going to understand that, I want to back up a little bit historically for a moment and give a little background. So Rome minted plenty of coins during its history. And if we go all the way back to Julius Caesar, when Julius Caesar died, um, he was trying to remember the exact history here. There were games made in his honor the following summer and to honor his memory. And during that time, there was a star that appeared in the heavens. And, we know from science today it wasn't a star, it was a comet, and the British saw it. But the people interpreted it as Julius Caesar returning back to heaven from whence he
Mm-hmm.
came. And it was at that
Mm-hmm.
point that the Senate deemed Julius Caesar to have been divine.
Yeah.
And Augustus, which was Julius Caesar's son, adopted son, but Augustus, he had a coin minted that on one side it said Augustus uh, um, I'm trying to remember the exact words. I've got them written down here if I can find them. But it had Augustus there as emperor, and on the back
Mm-hmm.
it had that Julian star, which is what it came to be known as.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's telling too. This total tangent, but I think it's telling too that things appearing in the heavens was indication that people were divine. You have in the
Right.
Gospel of Matthew when Jesus is born, there's a star that appears in the
That's
heavens.
right.
That came directly out of Roman culture.
Right.
That was the way that you looked at it. So Augustus's coin that he had minted had him as Caesar on the front, and then it had the Julian star on the back of the coin, as if to say, "I am son of the
God.
divine
Right.
Caesar. I'm son of God." Well, when Augustus died, in 14 CE, the Roman Senate deemed that Augustus was also divine. So now Augustus becomes not just the son of God, Julius Caesar, he becomes the divine son of God, Julius Caesar. And then then comes Tiberius, which was Augustus's son, and Augustus mints another coin, and it's this coin that was in circulation at the time of our reading this week that would have most likely been held up. And on the front, it had a picture of Tiberius Caesar, and the inscription was in English. It was in Latin, but in English, the transliteration is Tiberius is both Caesar Augustus, meaning emperor, and Augustus meant divine, and son of the divine Augustus. And so it was a claim again for Tiberius saying, I too am divine and son of the divine, who was son of the divine. He's actually the grandson of divine, if you think about it. Right. But so all of this was there. And then the woman on the back of the coin was most of the time interpreted to be Livia, who was Tiberius's mother. So here was the mother of the divine Son of God. All of this imagery, it sounds very Christian because that's where Christianity got it from, right? That's who Christianity was competing with from. But what I want our listeners to understand is that Jesus says, whose image is this and whose inscription? The image is that of Tiberius Caesar, and the inscription says, this is the divine Son of God. On the inscription right there on the coin, as this, the heart of the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. And Jesus then says, holding up this coin, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. But he doesn't stop there. He says, and unto God the things that are God's. And every Jewish listener that day that would have heard that would have saw the juxtaposition between the claims of Caesar and the demands of the God of the Torah. They would have remembered Exodus 20:2-5, where it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them and worship them. And so when Jesus says, whose image is this and what's the inscription saying? These good Jewish listeners would have heard that, and they would have immediately seen that the demands of the God of the Torah are in stark contrast to the claims of Caesar. You can't honor one without violating the other, and you can't be faithful to one without denying the other. And it would have put him in this juxtaposition. So where they set him up, and I love how tricky it is. They set him up to say, this guy's against paying taxes. He's against the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. He's a violator of Rome. And Jesus neither tells him to pay taxes or not to pay taxes. It's so ambiguous here because you're still left up asking, well, what is the lawful? What is the, because to God, the things that are God. Anyway, they would have heard the whole intent was to set him up as a violator of Rome. And instead, what Jesus does by his question in the hearts of the listeners there, the masses, they would have seen all of these elites, the upper class, those who have their places of power, privilege, and property in the temple state, who are basically just the servants of the Roman Empire. They are actually in violation of the Torah. So where he was set up to possibly be portrayed as violating the peace of Rome, they end up being indicted as being violators of the Torah and unfaithful to the God of the Torah. I think that's a slick kind of turnaround.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And even though he leaves it a little bit ambiguous, it points a direction towards what that would look like, and what that would look like in regards to economics, and what that would look like in regards to how you relate to the state.
You
That is
cannot
the
render
point.
to Caesar what Caesar is claiming as Caesar's, the status of divinity,
Right.
and unto God the things that the God of the Torah demands, which is to have no other gods. I just love the juxtaposition there, that if we just make it the traditional interpretation of I've got my civic duties and I've got my religious duties, and the secular and the sacred, and never the twain shall meet, we miss all of this nuance of how
Yeah.
Jesus is actually saying, really, once you're, like Dorothy Day said, once you're done giving to God everything God demands, there's really nothing left to give to Caesar.
Yeah. 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 That's well said.
So
So
the big thing is, I can totally see how this was applicable for them in their context.
mhm.
No president or political party or state governance or federal government, nobody's claiming to be divine today. So what do we do with that? How do we apply this teaching in our context? It almost seems like it's irrelevant.
Well, yeah, unless you still take that the claims of patriotism in our culture and what our American culture deems to be a good patriotic American, what that looks like and what their loyalty to the state looks like, and frowns upon disloyalty to the state, frowns upon challenging the nature of the state or the economics of the state or the governance of the state. Any of that is considered unpatriotic, and therefore there is this kind of demigod, semi-divine nature that goes with American mythology and American patriotism that causes us that causes American Christians to often confuse where
One
their
nation under
loyalties
God.
truly lie. A
Yeah.
lot of our churches have a flag, two flags in a church, one for the Christian faith and one for the American nation, and they are given equal status within the church building, and
That's a great
and that
visual of this text this week under Caesar, of that traditional interpretation, giving to
yeah,
Caesar what Caesar's and God what God's, and that they're equal rather
yeah,
than contradictory.
right. So there is, while we're not dealing with uh, divine presidents, we are nevertheless um, sometimes are asked to give loyalties to the state that may or may not conflict with the teachings of Scripture, the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Torah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I was kind of tongue in cheek saying it was irrelevant a minute ago. Just because the divine claims were what cut across a teaching of the Torah in the example we have this week, that doesn't mean that there are no claims of our nation state that ever contradict the teachings of
Mm-hmm.
Jesus or those claims or those demands. And so I think what it does for me is it calls me first and foremost to understand what the teachings of the Jesus story are, as we understand, as we have it today, to the best of our knowledge. What are those justice teachings? And then to be aware of what, when we say one nation under God, there's the temptation to think that every time I'm faithful to America, I'm being faithful to
Mm-hmm.
God. That's what
Mm-hmm.
it means to be, you know what I mean? We
Mm-hmm.
conflate the two. But what we need to do is be aware of where, as Jesus followers, where our commitment to ethics and values like love and justice and compassion, where those call in love of neighbor, where those call us to lean into our civic
Mm.
duties. And there are times when being a Jesus follower does make me a good American. There are some
Right.
things, so there's some things that are my civic responsibilities that I think the Jesus story does push me more deeply into. It heightens
Yes.
that dedication to those things. But there are also times where I need to be aware that there are sometimes the state is going to demand things that contradict my higher values. And so, I grew up in a school where we pledged allegiance every morning to the flag. And what this reminds me of is that I'm really only allegiant to America insofar as it doesn't contradict the higher values of love, compassion, and justice. And so there are times where love and compassion and justice causes me to, again, lean into my civic duties. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also times where love, justice, and compassion causes me to resist, to speak out, to obstruct, to not go along with things as they are. Sometimes you can't do both and you have to pick one.
Right. That's right. And one of those issues is um, not necessarily buying into hook, line, and sinker American military intervention,
Yeah,
and saying violence should not be an answer to the world's great problems. That there needs to be other means taken,
which is
active.
relevant right now.
Absolutely,
I mean, as
it's abs-
my opinion is that we should be against the sacrifice of innocent lives on both sides. We
correct.
shouldn't see human beings as just collateral damage. That
That's
doesn't
right.
mean we don't turn a blind eye to the civilian casualties of either side
That's right. That's right.
and the injustices of either side.
That's right. And too often there is allowance made for collateral damage as a necessary evil of what we do with our military, and that is frankly evil,
Yeah,
and it should
or
be
or there's a
opposed.
priority given to the casualties on our ally side
Correct.
when I mean, yeah, I don't know if we need to get into what's going on right now um in the Middle East with Hamas and Israel and Palestine. But
Yeah.
and those are three separate things.
Right.
But there are Palestinian Christians who, as a Christian, I should care about just as much.
That's right.
And even as a Jesus follower, whether they're Christian or not, they're human.
That's right.
I should care about just as much. And I understand America, United States of America wants its presence in the Middle East, and we have to be allies with Israel before that presence to exist, that military presence. But there's a check and a balance there that if we really believe in the universality of love and justice, that we just have to be careful.
A lot more careful than we have been.
Yeah.
And so it means calling that out. It means
Sometimes that's not popular.
no, it's not. And it's very unpopular to say you're against military intervention because people interpret that to mean you're against American men and women serving in the military. And we all know that all the decisions that are made about the military are made by political figures, and those of us who are against the types of military intervention that we see in our history, in our recent history, are against the political people who are making the decisions, and that's where we're ultimately having our disagreement with.
Mm,
And so
that's
it's
right.
anyway. That's that's one area that
Right.
where we say to give unto God what is God's means uh, not honoring our American Caesar's military philosophy.
Yeah. Too often, too often, and I know the sincerity of those who go into military service, but too often the military is used not to promote justice and democracy and freedom and all those things, but rather the capitalist interest of the global elite. And
Correct.
we just have to be honest about that.
Yeah.
And again, if you're listening to this and you are in the service, an old friend of mine who's a Mennonite, um, yeah, I said it in a way that really resonated with me years ago. And that is, to those who are willing to die for a cause, we should always honor and respect that. You
Absolutely.
know what I mean? The difference is that where we may disagree and have a conversation is whether or not we ever think that a cause justifies taking a life for it. You
Right.
know what I mean? And that's a different
Mm-hmm.
discussion. I can honor
Mm-hmm.
those who are willing to lay down their life for a cause,
Yes.
but we need to have a discussion on whether or not causes are worthy of taking someone else's life for that cause. And that's we could do a whole YouTube show series of talks
Mm-hmm.
on the teachings of Jesus and American militarism.
Yeah, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
But there are economic stuff too. I
Right.
mean, sometimes, I'm reading a great book right now called Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. If anybody out there hasn't read it, pick it up. It is a great book. And there are certain civic responsibilities we could lean into that would alleviate poverty. Um, and there are times where the system calls us to do things that create and aggravate poverty, and to know the
Right.
difference between the two and to cooperate with one to obstruct the other.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And that goes. Same principle applies to um, governance that doesn't address inherent racism in institutions and inherent inequality for LGBTQ folks. Um,
That's right.
this is
Because the
rolling along
overriding
with the status quo
the
when the
overriding
status quo needs to be
principle,
changed.
that's right. The overriding ethic is love of neighbor.
Right.
So where
Which is
America
an
calls me to
American
love my
ideal.
neighbor better, then do it.
Yep. Yep.
Where it contradicts that, we might find ourselves standing in a minority position, resisting some of that.
Yep.
So again, I think that holding when he held up that coin and said, "Whose image is this? Whose inscriptions on it?" It's a little bit more nuanced than the safe, kind of domesticated interpretation we grew up with.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus clearly, uh, in his teaching and his ministry, did not separate the sacred from the secular. Clearly his work and everything that he did and said was sacred in every way, shape, or form. And the things that people had put in secular categories like finance and governance and things like that, he brings very much to the heart of what God is trying to do in the world and what God wants to see changed in the world. And so this very much fits with what he's doing in the rest of his ministry,
Yeah,
the way we're
because
reading it tonight.
fidelity to Jesus's God in the Jesus story is always expressed through love of neighbor.
Right.
That's how it's manifest.
That's right.
We don't we don't worship God in a way that violates love toward our neighbor.
Yep. That's right.
Love of neighbor is the highest. Love of neighbor, love of enemy, love manifest through justice, distributive justice. Love is the highest ethic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. Well, that's great stuff on that passage. Anything else you want to add, Herb?
That's what I got this week, Todd. I just think the coin and the inscription on the coin, it makes the story a little bit more juicy.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's good stuff. So,
All right,
All
man.
right. So
Where
where
can
can
we
people
find
find?
you?
I can be found at toddjleonard.com. And where can we find you, Herb?
You can find me at renewedheartministries.com. And I'm still leaning on Todd to send me some stuff so you can find Todd at
I'm start.
renewedheartministries.com too.
I'm starting to feel the pressure. So we'll see. We'll we'll see what happens. See how long it takes me to succumb and start producing content. We will see. So, um, all right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Glad you were with us as always. We look forward to your comments under the video, and and with that, have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.